Today, the biggest, barrier of adoption is range anxiety, which is in the mind of user that, oh, if I go out with this and if the battery runs out, right, what will I do? Right. So for that, the entire battery swapping infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, the home, charging infrastructure, a lot of things, also possibly an SOS support needs to be built out, which could be very important for users to think of, right? And then, once, let's say, another comfort which is important for users to adopt electric vehicles is that they will get a repair and maintenance and spares, support, right? Which is also another key thing, that IC engine, you can get anywhere, you can get the puncture repaired, you can get the spare parts, you can get your stuff done. But here, that ecosystem is totally not present, which is another reason that people take a lot of time to go electric.
I'll quickly begin. Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to reconnect with everyone and our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sectors, such as e-mobility, energy, hospitality and tourism, retail, logistics, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with close to 10,000 like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Those leaders among you who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section, and will soon be sending invitations to our new guests post our webinar. And today we are privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry join in for our e-mobility discussion. The topic which we would like to discuss today is e-mobility, readying the playground for mass adoption. And just in the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of our panelists. We have with us Mr. Atul Arya, VP Mobility, Head Energy System Division, Panasonic India, Mr. Akash Gupta, co-founder and CEO Zypp Electric, and Mr. Samir Yajnik, Executive Director, ElectraEV. And our chair and moderator is Mr. Pavan Choudary, Chairman Blue Circle, best-selling author, CEO, business intellectual, and sits on several boards across the country. Welcome aboard. I now request Mr. Choudary to please chair and moderate the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gautam. It's a pleasure to be with all these three leading thinkers and practitioners of the sector, a very enlightened panel, and also a very diverse audience, because we are seeing people from the mobility sector, from the real estate sector, and energy sector. And this transition to EVs will happen at the intersection of these three sectors: mobility, real estate, and energy. Great. So if I look at the mass adoption of EVs, various segments will adopt differently. Two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, and their subsegments going into commercial and private spaces will have a different trajectory. But all these trajectories will depend or will be determined by four axes. First is the technological axis, starting from the performance of the machine to interoperability to even indigenization of the complete supply chain. Technological will be the first axis. The second axis will be financial, starting from the total cost of ownership to EV financing models to even the seconds market. The third axis would be infrastructural, the grid upgradation to the charging space. And the fourth axis would be policy and incentives, tangible, intangible, from setting up of infrastructure to recycling of the machine. So this is broadly how I see the mass adoption will proceed. Now let us talk about each of these axes, and let me invite my fellow panelists. Let me start with Samir and ask him, Samir, which axis would you like to start with, which in your mind is the most important one, if we can qualify one as most important, though all of them will be vital at some time and space. So which axis as per you is most important? And that is where we'll begin our conversation from. Samir.
Thank you, Pavan, and I'm very happy to be here to discuss this critical and important topic. I think, Pavan, you've very correctly put it that there are four axes, and obviously the outcome of a complex interplay between these four will determine the pace at which EV adoption will happen. But whether you want to call it most important from my point of view or something that is critical from our point of view as an organization, ElectraEV, we're obviously looking at technology as probably the most important, because in the past, the pull and push has happened, which is the push has happened from the government through the FAME incentives, 2 rounds, 2009, now 2019, etc., FAME 2. So the push has happened. But coming out of the pandemic, we see a huge pull, a demand coming from the market, new generation users, also fleet operators, and a whole host of others, which we'll discuss today. But the big issue for us is this going to be even a sustainable growth as we look at growth? You're talking about small percentages of adoption to very large percentages over the next 3-4 years or 5-6 years. If it's going to be sustainable, it has to be the strongest access, support that is needed is on the technology side, on the supply chain side as well, because demand will come. It's for sure. The pull, we can see it, and it's already happening. We don't have to, belabor on that. But if you look at technology, and again, technology breaks down into the elements of the EV, the whole Atmanirbharta on battery technologies, the motor technology, or the e-traction system, as we call it, and all the electronics that goes, and the issues that we are today having on chips, on the non-availability of chips, and the issue of how we're going to dispose of batteries, and a whole lot of other things on the supply chain side. And finally, all this together is going to determine, are we really going to move along that exponential track that we see the demand already playing out at? And therefore, of course, the finance guy, these guys will crack it. The banks working with the OEMs and the end users will be able to crack how creative models will be created. Infra will happen. I can tell you this: once the pull is there, there'll be hundreds of players who will come in, and the government is already doing a lot, both central and state governments. So anyway, I want to keep it brief so that I allow the others to also comment. But in my view, the technology aspect is probably the most important for a sustainable growth.
Well, I concur. And in fact, I was just looking at the other new products or technologies which have come to the market. In the beginning, it is the technology which is most important, because the technology needs to stabilize. What would you like to add to that, Atul, to what Samir has said so far regarding the 4 determinant axes before we go deeper into them?
No, so first of all, thank you very much for having me on this webinar and to be with all of you. As far as the topic, Pavan, I think nobody would disagree with what Samir just said. Technology is something which really is the driver in solving any kind of problem. And I think whatever electrification today is happening, it is primarily because of multiple technologies emerging over a period of time, reaching a point where interplay of those technologies like battery, motor, and other drivetrain, semiconductor, and software technologies coming together. And so if any of these pieces were missing, perhaps we would not be sitting here and talking about where the EV is going and how it would go further. So without doubts, this is the priority number one. This is the most important, one of the most important activity, the access, as you called it. Adding further on this, I think in the context of readying the playground for mass adoption, and this is where, so technology has brought it to a point where now having an electric scooter or electric car or electric bus is a reality. But to go from where we are to the mass adoption, there are certain elements which would need to further boost. And of course, technology will have to also go into the next cycle of bringing further mass adoption. But finance, for example, which typically chases all the lucrative technologies, should now be sort of, taking the lead here, because I think for example, today we talk about lithium-ion batteries being there, but the cost being higher, right? So newer financial engineering is required to make it lighter in terms of affordability, and mass adoption could take place, for example. Similarly, I think taking the case of India, we need to invest a lot on the human capital, right? Because currently what technology we use today is primarily a technology which we sort of imported. There is no indigenous lithium-ion technology. There is a limited, technology on motors and variety of other stuff. Of course, we have a huge human capital on software, but we need to have a lot more sensitization and a lot more need for development of human capital to work further and improve the technology, for example, in material sciences and chemistry, which goes around. I think this is another important aspect which I would like to add here.
Oh, excellent point. In fact, what you're saying is that all things being equal, technology is important. At the same time, capital is important. And by bringing in the example of battery manufacturing plants, you have said that we are not only talking about the capital requirements of the consumer who might want some leasing option, some lowering of interest rates, some lowering of down payment required as in IC vehicles. You are saying that there are large investments also to be made. And I'm reminded of Boeing and Airbus. They had both come into being, both had planes ready to fly, but their planes were not selling at all until they went to the bankers to give them suggestions to opt for financial engineering to support the airline industry, because otherwise airline industry did not have the wherewithal to buy these kind of machines. So very good point. That is, you have, by highlighting that point, you have enriched the discussion. Let us go to Akash and ask him, Akash, what do you think among these, other than technology and finance, what are the other main determinants of mass adoption?
Great, thanks, Pavanji, for asking the question, and thank you for having me here to the Blue Circle team. See, if you talk about mass adoption, right? So while, let's say, technology and the piece of financing is important, But also we are talking about a shift which is once in 100 years, right? The entire mobility landscape is going through a change from IC engines to EVs, right? And with that comes a lot more areas to work on. One of them is definitely the education of the user, right? Because today the way the EVs will be used versus the way the IC engines developed and the user mindset is to use them is going to be very different. I mean, we face the education of driver challenge as one of the key things, right? And nobody is working on it. Because if you race it very much, your mileage reduces. When to charge is a big factor, to get the efficiencies of the product that you have baked in, right? So those are one of the areas. The other large area is, in terms of the infrastructure play, right? You need to, today, the biggest, barrier of adoption is range anxiety, which is in the mind of user that, oh, if I go out with this and if the battery runs out, right, what will I do, right? So for that, the entire battery swapping infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, the home, charging infrastructure, a lot of things, also possibly an SOS support needs to be built out, which could be very important for users to think of, right? And then, once, let's say, another comfort which is important for users to adopt electric vehicles is that they will get a repair and maintenance and spares, support, right? Which is also another key thing that, IC engine, you can get anywhere, you can get the puncture repaired, you can get the spare parts, you can get, your stuff done. But here, that ecosystem is totally not present, which is another reason that people, take a lot of time to go electric. Those were my
excellent interventions. In fact, when you said 100 years, once in 100 years this happens, my mind went back to more than 100 years ago when the ICE engine automobile won. That time, of course, there were similar problems. Gasoline was available only on chemist shops in very small quantities. So you had to go to hundreds of, maybe tens of chemist shops to fill your tank. Then road and range. Range was also important. It was not there. And roads were also not there for tire-based vehicles to run. Then performance was also poor. Steering wheels used to spin 4 or 5 times before they used to turn the tire. Tires were themselves not available. So, but it also hit at that time a socio-cultural and awareness issue where people felt that automobiles versus horses, one depreciates, the other appreciates because horses reproduce, but automobiles were not reproducing. So it was not an appreciating asset. Also, there was a lifestyle thing. And I'm sure these are also nuances there, though movement from horse to an automobile was a more discontinuous change. And this is a little less discontinuous change, but lot of education. And you said driver education also, that is also important because many a time what we are noticing that if the drivers are not educated, they blame the vehicle and the owners of fleets then start distrusting that genre of vehicles. Also ecosystem, and on that ecosystem, let me go to Samir. Samir, Akash is mentioning that there has to be a complete ecosystem. That means the mechanic also should be there. The spare part provider should be there. Perhaps the recycler should be there. So how do you think this is emerging? Because this can also be broadly fit into that bucket of technology. Samir.
Absolutely correctly stated. I was just thinking when Akash mentioned that, he mentioned driver, teaching the drivers how to drive it differently to get better range. He also spoke about repairs. He spoke about a number of different topics. I put that all under the bucket of service or serviceability of these vehicles. And you need a complete, end-to-end thinking through of how these EVs will be serviced overall. from the time you deliver it to the user, whoever that might be, maybe a commercial user, maybe an individual user, and the time, how often does it need to go to your dealerships or whatever. So there is a complete rethinking of how these EVs will run and how, at least in the fleet market where we operate most, how they can maximize the use of these EVs. And therefore, lots of creative ideas and a lot of technology is going in. For example, we've obviously come out with a doctor compounder theory of, have key people who understand and who've lived with EVs for not too many years, because EVs haven't been in India for more than, they've been for a while, but in terms of mass adoption, or at least to some extent adoption, no more than 5 years. So you've got these people who've used them at the time of design and development, but also at the time of validation, and also at the time of now usage. We call them the key doctors, it's like a hub and spoke model. And then they are then transmitting that knowledge to the compounders who know how to, dismantle or repair elements of the vehicle, which is very different from an ICE, by the way, and to diagnose. So even there's e-diagnostics, so remote diagnostics that happen, but all that has to be taught. And finally, you then go into the third tier, which is the mechanic out there. He needs to be taught how to explain to the driver how to drive, but also how to quickly repair, because we can't afford loss of time in the fleet market. Even in the personal segment, you can't afford these vehicles to be off-road for too long. So we are completely rethinking that using a lot of technology. We've got what we call a dashboard system, like an e-cockpit system, wherein some of the main guys sit on the central headquarters, and then we've got the doctors sitting in the zonal offices and then fixing these online. So there's a lot of rethinking happening there, and I'm sure that will be adopted in wherever whoever is trying to reach to mass adoption. And then technology. Today, individual users are getting very educated very quickly. If you look at the Nexon EV, it comes with a Z Connect, wherein you can remotely look at where your vehicle is, how much it is charged, even turn on ACs or look at repairability. Where is your next repair center? Or if you don't want to go here, where do you get spare parts? So it's expanding in what it can do. So the whole world of serviceability is, I agree, very critical to the Indian market to see how quickly it can be taken to mass adoption.
So you're saying serviceability, performance in the product, of course, performance covers range anxiety, charging ease, everything it covers.
Yeah.
These are the two most important technological determinants of mass adoption. Is that what you're saying, Samir?
This is what I'm viewing right now. There may be other elements to mass adoption that will come out of the debate, but certainly from where I see this, these are the two elements that are most prominent and where we are working on most.
I tend to agree with you, unless the other panelists would add something which we have missed. Let me ask Atul. Atul, from the financial piece, what are the most important determinants of mass adoption?
Well, I think on the financial piece, typically the reluctance or let's say, still relative reluctance to get into this business on behalf of many financial institutions is basically ability to understand what this electric vehicle as an animal is in terms of what is going to be the life of this vehicle. Typically, one of the key determinants in India, especially when somebody buys an automobile, is to know firsthand that when I sell after a few years, what is the resale value I'm likely to get, right? And that somehow also determines my interest to pay that upfront cost. So if I know I'm paying 10 lakhs and I can get 5 lakhs after 5 years, I'm very happy, versus another car which I can fetch only 2 lakhs. So that kind of thing is extremely important. And this clearly comes with a track record to begin with. A lot of things come from that kind of a data which people have collated over a period of time. And one of the key elements here, especially in the electric vehicle, would be instead of an engine or anything else, would be the battery. And at this point of time, of course, with due respect to the overall fraternity, but many consumers and many other stakeholders in the financial industry do not understand it so well that they can put a value to it, and especially being a significant part of the cost of vehicle to the tune of 40 to 50%. And I think this will make or break, as we make this more and more clear, the ability to understand the battery, which can come from various parts of it. For example, Samir and Akash just talked about, the IoT piece being used, collecting all the data and information and monitoring it real time, for example, then having that data and analyzing over a period of time and being able to discern battery A and battery B, and then put the right value around the battery, and saying that, okay, if you have this battery, then obviously this is what is the performance, versus this battery, this is the performance, and similarly for other parts of the vehicle. So I think basically what I'm trying to say is that with this information which will come from various sensors on the vehicle, which are related to essentially performance of various subsystems of the vehicle, and topmost of them being a battery, and then in that sequence other drivetrain and motor and other parts, would essentially help financial industry to lose that fear and come forward and be more bullish about it.
Very good. I think you have hinted at an area in the end, which is at the intersection of e-mobility and energy, that this battery, even after 5-10 years, might have still value to command in the market. An IC engine vehicle car has a life of 300,000 kilometers. An electric vehicle has a car has a life of 1,600,000 kilometers. But even after that, this battery might be used in the energy storage space in renewable energy sector. So, and I'm glad that there are people from those sectors also who are indirectly participating in this discussion as the audience. So that is a great point. The other point which you mentioned is financial industry needs to become more aware of the product, so that they have as friendly plans for its financing, whether in terms of down payment, interest rates, which are much more both for EVs as compared to the IC engine. Very good points. Let me take it to Akash on the beautiful point which Akash left us with. Akash said not 4 axis. Akash said 5th axis is also there, socio-cultural, technological, financial, infrastructural, policy and incentives, and socio-cultural, which means education also. So would you like to add any other point to what has been discussed on the technology and financial point so far, Akash, in addition to what has been spoken by Samir and Atul? And then we will go back to Samir to ask him if he would like to add something to this entire socio-cultural, financial and technological piece.
Sure.
Akash.
Sure. So on the financial piece, I have a couple of points to add, right? So, I mean, we've deployed around 2,000, EVs in the market, and I'll just give you a little bit of context that how we were able to get to 2,000, right, in the last 12 to 18 months, and that was the journey of financing concerns, right? So when we started and we reached out to banks for giving us when we were 2 years back at about 50-60 vehicles, we wanted to deploy 200, but at that time banks were not warming up to EVs. They didn't know it's a new asset. None of the assets had, even our assets had completed a life of 5 years. And hence there were regular concerns that they don't fund EVs, right? The regulations from the government were also not very clear, right? So we launched a very interesting program where we talked to all our users. We had around 100,000 odd users at that time. We talked to all of them that would you want to invest in an electric vehicle, right? And we will give you a return on top of it, right? Which is a healthy return, 20-25% IRR we will pay you. But would you want to buy a 50,000 priced scooter, and let's say I pay you 2,000 rupee a month for 36 months, so that's your earning. We actually got a lot of people because of, one, an attractive IRR, and second, supporting the EV ecosystem. A lot of people came forward, and actually from 50 to 200, we rather reached to about 300 vehicles with that intervention, right? And still banks were not warming up to this. Then we got a couple of OEMs who came forward and they said that we will lease to you directly. You don't have to even go to individuals. We will give you vehicles, you pay us the rentals. That was the second intervention to build the EV ecosystem, right? Slowly and steadily, what we realized that the ecosystem got a few more players who were interesting syndicates, right? Fintech NBFCs, who were new age NBFCs. They started finding investors for us, right? And these were HNIs. People found that asset investment is a new asset class of making 18 to 20% IRR versus real estate and stocks, right? So that started building up very interestingly. And now is the time, once we've reached a certain scale, that now HDFC Bank, who's our banker, they are coming forward that we would also love to do this, right? So that's the journey of EV adoption, I would say over the last 18 to 24 months that we've seen. There are new age impact NBFCs who are created, who are ready to, fund. And there are a lot of government programs also, which we are seeing to support the drivers and to support EV adoption. Obviously, subsidy is acting as a great bonus at the moment, which is the government intervention, on FAME 2, and then the state subsidy, which is making all this, quite attractive proposition now. But yeah, and I'll still wait for a few more interventions, as the journey progresses.
No, very good. You have said that that some people push the bus when it is stationary, and some people board the bus only when it is partially in motion. So the traditional banks have come as the latter party, but NBFCs and impact NBFCs are already pushing the bus even when it was stationary. That's great. So coming to Samir, anything to add to the technological, financial and socio-cultural determinants for mass adoption?
First, I'd like to make an interesting quip. I think I'd like to equate it to my life in Singapore. In Singapore, we have a phrase, very interesting. It's called being kiasu. I don't know how many of you who've lived in or been to Singapore know the phrase. Singaporeans have this very typical culture where, if 2 or 3 people do something, then everybody else wants to do it because they have a fear of being left out. Mm-hmm. The word kiasu means the fear of being left out, right? I see a little bit of that happening now, that, look, it's such a hot thing to do, and it's really, I am so environmentally conscious that if I do it, I bought an EV. I got about 10 calls from my society people saying, how much is it? Can I buy it? How quickly can I get it? Blah, blah, blah. Before that, when we had raised it in the society meetings, nobody was interested. No, that's in the future. So you get one and suddenly you see a topple effect or a kiasu effect. So that's happening. But where I want to really add is, I think the brilliant point made on the residual value of the car as being a determinant. And in fact, the banks, to be honest, were a little cautious, not kiasu, cautious to get into it because they said, look, I don't want to fund this because I don't know what is the residual value. Slowly, they've begun to crack it because, you know why? Because we actually started, so similar to what Akash said, we've actually had over almost 2,500 cars in the field, in driving around in India. And there's a lot of data that we picked up from there. And now it's reaching the third year. And we picked up a lot of data as to what happens to at least our battery packs. I mean, there are obviously different battery packs, and I'm sure they have different lives, and and you can take it differently. But typically, what happens to the cell and the life of the battery pack overall is trending similarly after a period of 3 to 4 years, from second year, third year, fourth year onward. So I think that informs all the stakeholders that what's happening, and it's not so bad actually. And to that, the government has always been very proactive. What they've said is, look, we are going to have a disposal policy. So we're going to ensure that at the end of X years, whatever the 4,000 or 2,000 or 8,000 cycle of life that your battery has, you're going to have a very clear disposal strategy. Now, that could be twofold. It could be reuse, which is what you said, Pavan, which is the second life energy utilization of batteries, cells, etc. Or it could be complete disposal. There too, you extract the minerals out and you can reuse that. So there's a policy coming out on that. If it's not already out, then if it's out, it's my bad. I don't know of the whole policy, but I do know that it's on its way, and we are already working actively with people to ensure that it either reaches second life or it reaches disposal. So just these two extra points I wanted to make.
Yeah, and I'm glad that the bureaucrats in India and the policy makers in India are also infected by that kiasu thing which you mentioned, so that they should not be the last to board the electric vehicle bus, which is touring all the world and getting a lot of votaries. So great point. Atul, on the infrastructural side, what are the main determinants of mass adoption?
Okay, but just before I go to that, I would just add to what Samir and Akash said, and especially on that word kiasu. In some sense, it's not only limited to a particular set of stakeholders, whether it is government or consumers. It's with everyone. We can clearly see, what happened with the electric mobility industry. Once Tesla did it, then everybody is now scrambling to do it. And similarly, if you take India, post Ola did what they made an announcement, the whole of two-wheeler fraternity is scrambling to, quicken the pace versus what they were doing before. So I think it's kiasu everywhere in that sense. And now coming to the infrastructure, look, Pavan, you initially talked about the IC vehicle industry, how it grew. There were no roads. There were the fuel was not available. People used to go to pharmacies and whatnot. The turn of wheel, etc., etc. See, what drives a new technology is really the convenience which it brings in many cases, or the advantages it brings in. And everybody has clearly understood today, including governments, that clean is the way to go. So it's coming from COP as the direction and overall global effort to bring in, cleanliness to our environment. So that trend is not going anywhere, right? And the choice of fuel may change. Many people may say that, batteries would evaporate and then, hydrogen will come, etc., etc. But for sure, it's going to be a clean thing. So infrastructure demands for any new technologies will always keep coming, and we will continuously, as humankind, continuously keep evolving that. For that matter, it's nothing to do. It's not a comment which is demeaning or about our country's infrastructure, but the fact is that, for example, I live in NCR, right? We have far too many cars and far too less roads. We are still, as a country, as a nation, we are still building highways. For sure, we are doing it faster and better highways. But the fact is that we are still building roads. Forget about electric. And so is the case with any other infrastructural piece. So this is a continuous process. And I'm quite confident that because the time of this technology has come in, because we have serious and sincere companies jumping into this fray. The fact that Akash is doing what he's doing, a young man who is really working hard to build this startup. Samir is doing what he's doing in terms of building the whole ecosystem around it. And likewise, many companies, government is playing its role. I think everything is a part of, a puzzle which will fall in place. But on the technology side, I guess we still need to evolve a little bit, especially on the charging infrastructure. We need to understand few things, many people mistake it and try to put it as an equivalent of refueling an IC vehicle. And hence I hear and read lot many times that petrol stations, for example, will be the charging hubs, right? Etc. etc. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think chargers are needed almost everywhere, in the places where we live, in the places where we work, probably on the street side, in the parkings, in the malls, everywhere. The simple fact is that electric vehicles can be charged, like our phones can be charged. You just need to plug in and leave them somewhere, right? So when you go into your office, you spend X number of hours, depending on the kind of job you have. You can just plug in there and let it charge over a period of time. And same could be done at home. Now the argument could come that every apartment building doesn't have a charger, which is perfectly valid question. But many of the apartments today don't even have the lift to go up. There are 4-storied apartments, and people are installing those lifts now by renovating, right? So as and when the need arises, the technology will not only be easy to adopt, affordable. So there would be progress on that. And the second point, which I just want to add on to the infrastructure piece, while many of us are just looking at chargers alone, right? There is a backend to this, which is extremely important. And the backend is the distribution companies, and this I say for many of our colleagues in the industry fraternity who advocate fast charging, and that's where when we imagine fast chargers coming in, 50 kilowatt, 4 chargers in one place, we are talking of 200 kilowatt, right? We are really talking of a very, very large conductor and in some sense unimaginable kind of loads in an apartment, for example, or in an office building. And that's where the distribution companies will need to step in, or we'll have to sort of learn and recalibrate our expectations with respect to fast and slow charging.
Yeah. On the Ola piece, which is a new player in the market, which has shaken the market, which was earlier dominated for very good reasons by organizations like Hero Electric. It has suddenly gone on to the front end of this sector. I will involve Samir in this dialogue further. Before that, I come to Akash. Akash, from the grid charging piece, from the grid upgradation piece, which Atul mentioned, to the charging infrastructure piece, is this the main determinant, or is there any other infrastructural thing also you're looking at? And within this, how would you like to illuminate this path from the grid infrastructure to the final charging point?
So I think that space is quite, and I'll be frank on that, that space is quite fluid right now, right? Because and there are 3 elements that we are talking about in the entire infrastructure piece. One is a 4-wheeler, which has a different, kind of a charging requirement and infra requirement. The other is a 3-wheeler, which is, so 4-wheeler essentially is working through fast charging, is what, and there are companies like ESL or GeoBP who are setting up those charging point stations, at various places, public spots. Then comes a three-wheeler, which interestingly is a phenomenon which is working on swapping, right? Because the battery is swappable and people do not want to invest uh, themselves into the batteries. It's better to work via swaps. And there are a lot of companies and startups and large companies also are entering into the entire swapping infrastructure, especially built for three-wheelers, because that's where the traction is. And the conversion from lead acid to lithium ion is also happening, which is focusing and building that change. And third, asset class that we are talking about is the scooters, right? Which is going to be the larger segment in India, being a 80% two-wheeler market. There, the phenomenon is mostly either home charging, right, which is working, or some of the players are also trying swapping, which is yet to be proven to work out the unit economics and to work out the handling and the infrastructure costs. What is better, right? So those are the three elements which are actually moving in different silos at the moment, right? And very little interconnected with each other, right? Right from the grid to the charging infrastructure, I think a lot of pieces of standardization have to be solved, right? Which I don't see even the large OEMs still thinking about that, right? Whether they want to standardize the plug points, standardize the charging infrastructure for their specific vehicles across the board, specific asset class, whether four-wheeler, three-wheeler. That's not happening at the moment, right? Still in India, I was talking to someone. There are so many places where there is no electricity, right? And we are talking about mobility, which is going to be electric, right? So while I know that we are all focusing on the major metros and tier one towns which are electrified, but we are talking about towns and villages where there's no electricity still in the country, and we are talking about mobility to go electric, right? Those are also points which I think we'll have to all work together. Large companies are working on this, and that's a bone that I would love to put on the group for everyone to think.
Very, very well fleshed out. Just to add to it, and of course, you know that regarding buses, those are very large batteries, and we require some kind of standardization as well as reduction of the size of the battery. And regarding three-wheelers, the charging points which are publicly available are of lower quality. There's a lot of electricity theft, etc. All those points also have to be worked through. But great. Coming to Samir, there has been, and a question has also come around those lines. There has been a point which people have said that because ICE engines have had a lot of investment made in them, which is why the automobile companies which are there in ICE engines will be reluctant to move to electric vehicles. However, with the entries of the Olas of the world, and with the fact that the first electric vehicle did not come from an conventional automobile manufacturer, but Tesla, which is the most valuable company in the world today. And also going by hindsight that the aeroplane was also manufactured by two brothers, Wright brothers, who were actually in bicycle manufacturing. And with all this, are we past that argument that there is so much of sunk cost that the conventional industry will not invest in electric vehicles enough? And also given the examples of the few announcements which have been made, and the needle is already moving in that space in the conventional sector also. Samir.
Brilliant question. I'll answer that in 2-3 different ways, I guess. First and foremost, you're absolutely correct in saying that the disruptive button has been pressed by Ola in the same way as Elon Musk had pressed it for Tesla. And the bells have started ringing in terms of, if you want to catch me, then see whether you can catch me or not. And I'm not even an auto player. Now, my view, and this is first-hand view, is that OEMs, traditional OEMs, if they're not thinking out of the box for India, I'm not saying for the rest of the world. My pertinence or my relevance is to India, is that they do think that India has not reached scale yet. At least this was the view till 2020, early 2020, until we woke up to post-second wave pandemic, where there was a huge demand for electric vehicles. So I have personally been through discussions where OEMs have taken it up to a point and then said, no, we want to just take direction from our global headquarters, and they think India is not ready yet, and therefore we're not going to invest. Although they did dabble with it and experiment with it and kind of dropped it. So having seen what happened in the last 3 years, I agree with you that they have invested so much in ICEs that they would much rather continue to milk that product line, if I may call it that in a slightly crude way, because they've got their platform strategies worked out. And they were just hoping that EVs would take their own time. That's a 2030 thing. Don't even bring it to me yet. But suddenly, with the waking up and the pull that I mentioned in the beginning coming in, companies who had even half thought of investing or had perhaps invested a little bit have taken the big leap and made big announcements. I see every week, or if not every day, new inquiries, new questions, new news articles, and new friends talking about XYZ company also coming in and now coming into the market. And I'm talking more on the four-wheeler or the off-highway space, not so much the two-wheeler space, which I'm sure is inundated with new and existing players. So I think the answer to that question is, they have up until now been rather conservative. The tipping point has come already, where they see that some early guys who've taken bets, obviously Tata Motors, Ola, others, Hyundai in some senses, who had taken early bets, they are already seeing fairly big returns on their initial investments, and obviously they are investing more and more, and probably will the early bird catch it all and run away with it. So a lot of people are jumping in now. So it's almost like a rush, and that Kiasu element has kicked in. So to keep it brief, yes, your statement is right, but the change has come and the change is here, and I can see the inflection point already. People are talking big numbers, and they're talking about coming into India in big ways, both existing OEMs as well as new age ones who want to come and disrupt.
Correct. So, and we are noticing that on the Blue Circle app also, we are seeing investors seeking out investments in this space. So Akash, when you would have started, he would not have seen that kind of weather we noticed from his comment, but it is the momentum is gathering. Great. On the last point, and just your 1 minuters on this, on the policy piece, how can policy encourage mass adoption? What are the key determinants of policy which will encourage mass adoption? Atul, Akash, and then Samir, and then we'll come to some questions which are quite interesting.
Well, I think great question, Pavan. Policy is an extremely important access, if you were to define in your terms, as you spoke. In terms of government of India doing having interventions on policy, they have already had FAME 1 and FAME 2, and I think FAME 2, as far as policy is concerned, is quite lucrative, especially for a class of vehicles which is two-wheelers and three-wheelers to some extent, and on the charging infrastructure as well. So much so that it takes care of pretty much almost all of the battery cost, if you were to see, and if you were to also add in the state subsidies which come into play when you go to some states like Delhi. So a great step has already been taken. And we also know there is a PLI scheme to start making lithium-ion cells in India, and the capacity envisaged is 50 gigawatt. And that's where I think we could do a slightly better, or a far more deep dive into the policy game. Especially and also taking cue from what Samir was saying, that the Indian OEMs were talking about India not being lucrative, right? In my own understanding, we don't live in an Indian market per se. Neither we are a consumer who is buying from Indian sources or just the Indian local market anymore, or even your local municipal market anymore, and nor as a supplier we are a supplier to only India, right? We have examples. I mean, you buy from Amazon and you buy from wherever, right? You can buy online, and similarly you can sell online. So the market is global. Therefore, our policies should be designed to address this aspect. So, for example, the global capacity likely to be available for lithium-ion batteries is going to be something like 3,000 gigawatt by 2030, which is like in this decade, right? And what we are aiming is only 50 gigawatt of this. So essentially, to me, it appears that we are talking of only a subset of Indian market, not even the full Indian market to begin with. That's one. And secondly, similarly, there should be a policy on the ecosystem players for example, for cell. So cell is not just about assembling the cell. It's also about electrolyte. It's also about the anode and the cathode. Also about separator. And there is a lot of industry in India, chemicals, fine chemicals, which could make a move from what they do to be participating in the global market. And if there is going to be 3,000 gigawatt capacity globally, I think Indian chemical players and material science players have a huge aspect potential for them, and government could really support them.
Yeah. Great point. Akash, anything to add on the other determinants which can influence mass adoption affected by policy?
So my point would be very small on this because I was recently on a panel with the Niti Aayog team, and we did some event also with them. I think government is doing a lot of effort, and I must say that right from batteries, plants, setting up battery plants in India, right, to doing PLI schemes or FAME subsidies and extending them. I think the entire mad rush which is happening is all because some of those interventions being there. And the good part is that the current government is pro EV, and they realize the importance of, they realize the importance of moving away from fossil fuels, right, with the rising fuel prices. So my only, request and submission on the policy side would be that whatever is happening, we should not consider this to be that we've achieved everything now, while we see an inflection point, while we see things are happening in the right direction. But I think we are still scratching the surface. And whatever is happening should at least be looked at from a long-term perspective, that we should continue this for at least the next 24 to 36 months if we have a net zero or a 2030 mission of zero emission, right? That would be my request and submission on the policy side, that let's not go gung-ho, let's stay grounded, and let's continue whatever is happening in the right direction.
Samir, any other additional policy related determinants of mass adoption?
4 points from me very quickly. First one, I agree. I think FAME 2 needs to graduate to FAME 3, looking at the phase-wise manufacturing plan. But looking at, yes, government wants to look at second and third degree localization, but they need to look at the global issues with chip shortages, and they need to factor that in. But it needs to continue for the next 10 years, number one. Number two, I'm big on innovation clusters. I think just having demand creation incentives is okay, but you need to have R&D working closely with large MNCs, small companies, and be application specific, and set up clusters which will directly benefit maybe different kind of battery usage for the two-wheeler market, set up somewhere and giving direct funds to it, either coming in from any part of the world, which could be a global cluster. So, third point, state government needs to continue to provide incentives specifically for charging and infrastructural related issues, because state government can add lots of value there. and they haven't thought through it completely. Although some like Maharashtra government is talking about giving lesser society tax and all that, but it's not completely thought through because it's not really adding up to much. And the last one, the PLI scheme is good, but it needs a bit of tweaking, both on battery as well as on chips.
Great. So on this, let me add, adoption of any new technology can be very hugely facilitated by policy. For example, seat belts, when they came, despite the fact Volvo gave away the patent, outsourced the patent, that means anybody could use their seat belt design. They were not still being used till it was made mandatory to use seat belts. And after that, there was a sea change. Similarly, the retrofitting policy or the policy of compulsory disposal of, or let me say, disposal of 15-year-old or 10-year-old diesel engine vehicles and retrofitting policies. Of course, these can also help really very strongly in mass adoption. And of course, they should be thoroughly made. They should be technology agnostic, something which Akash pointed out towards. And they should have minimal unintended consequences. So great discussion so far. There are many very good questions. I will first of all name the people who have asked the questions, then try to weave them into together, 2 or 3 together, and come to each one of you. So Sunil Mehta, CEO Virya Batteries, has asked a great question. Chris M, Country Sales Head of Oasis Engineering Energy Applied Technologies, has asked another good question. Atul Nath, CEO OneBus. Bharat Ramdas, founder Ikasha. Srinath Manda, freelance business consultant, and Amit Rawat of CBRE have all asked great questions, and so has Animesh Walia, very pointed and sharp questions. Let me come to them in a cluster. First, let me come to Atul. Do you expect the downward price trend of lithium-ion cells to turn upward, and for what time period? And in the same genre, is there a chance of coming into glass batteries instead of current lithium-ion versions? These 2 questions, very quick answers on this, please.
So I think great questions. First of all, on the battery pricing. Battery pricing is a function of 2 things. One is the major contributor is the material cost which goes into it. And the commodities have been actually firming up. As I spoke earlier, the capacity is being ramped up globally in Europe, in US, in Japan, in China, everywhere. And mining in many cases has not really kept the pace with that. And it may not happen at the same pace. Therefore, there is a pressure on the upward pressure on the prices. So I'm sure many people have seen, at least we've seen as a company. But the other element which is bringing down the prices of batteries is, one, the scale at which it is happening. So obviously there are advantages of scale. And second, the technological interventions. So for example, from changing the form factor of cell, from 18650 to 2170 to now 4860. These are examples which, for example, our company has been pioneer in all of them, right? And tried to increase the energy density, less usage of material, changing chemistries from NCM to NCA, substituting some of the more precious elements with the less precious elements, etc., etc. So I think this is what is going to bring the price down continuously, and therefore the curve may be slightly different from what many people have been projecting. The second aspect of the second question which you asked about glass batteries, look, any kind of battery chemistry or a battery, glass battery essentially is a solid state battery, will need to pass through certain stages, apart from development in lab, to have prototypes, and then to, pass the safety test and, repeatability cycles, etc., etc. And then also this is also required to build a manufacturing ecosystem. So even if you have technology, you need to put in money to build. And we were talking about just some time back about shifting from IC to electric, right? So similarly, from lithium to glass also would need a lot of investment. Therefore, this is going to take some time.
So, Samir, if you'd like to add something to that, or to the status or possibility of self-reliance in EV battery value chain. This is one point. And the other question is coming from, as I said, real estate piece from Amit Rawat of CBRE. How do you plan to build the infrastructure in Mumbai or similar cities where people are living in flats and parking space is scarce? How are people going to charge their vehicles if there are no charging docks for personal usage? Currently, I see buildings with 200 plus flats with 1 or 2 charging docks. He's talking about cars, I think. Go ahead, Samir.
I'll be quick. One, we are experiencing battery prices going up for sure, coming from the Far East, particularly China. And as Atul correctly said, it's a function of raw material and demand. And both of that has seen a bit of pressure. The raw material, because obviously because of the COVID situation, whatever raw materials they were mining has not been kept to speed, and the demand in China itself has been high. Mostly China we're talking about. So there's been a increase of about 5 to 7%. But on a longer term, I think the downward trend of prices will continue. So this is a blip. Hopefully the COVID situation will ease up a little bit and we'll see the downward trend continuing, is a lot of analysts' guess and mine as well. And we are experiencing that minor increase in price, so to speak. As far as Atmanirbharta goes, I see a lot of action that's happening in India as far as TRL level 2, 3, 4 is concerned. That means technology readiness in different types of battery types. You call it aluminium air, you call it sodium ion, many others. I mean, there are so many you could speak of. However, I think when it comes to actual, use and then finally manufacturing at scale, I see that to be not converting into, or not taken up by large investors. So I hope that situation changes. We are also investing in, for example, lithium sulfur, funding it where R&D is happening. We're not doing it ourselves, obviously. But hopefully, when it comes to TRL 7 and 8, and then into manufacturing and real usage, that's when it will happen. I think it's still about 3 to 5 years away. With those PLI schemes, we might see things change, but then again, you're bringing in lithium from the outside. So is it really Atmanirbhar or not? You asked another question, and can you repeat that again? The second part of your question was related to...
Second part of my question was related to the real estate challenge.
Yeah, in Mumbai. I think very specifically, I'm sitting in Mumbai. So the government has already announced, see, first and foremost, let's be clear. For personal use, 200, 250 kilometers city driving, there's absolutely no issue. You want to keep your battery life stable, you need to slow charge, put it on charge at night on a normal 16 amp socket, works perfectly, no problem. So in city driving, there's absolutely no issue. So we are encouraging, when I say we, I think the BMC in Mumbai, for example, is encouraging, fast charging and slow charging sockets to be put up, fast charging infrastructure to be put up in societies, and they're actually giving incentives on property tax. So I think those are great incentives and people just need to adopt them. I know a half a dozen companies in my area who are going ahead and doing that. You will see that slow and steady, but as the pull factor comes in, this will automatically happen. So I don't see it being very far away from the people who want to use EVs. But then again, can the government do more? Yes, it can do more. How can it do more? Well, you could have pilots set up where you're showing how these things really work effectively, either in societies or working with community spots in large crowded cities like Mumbai. So I don't have a specific answer, but we are already working on this in societies in Mumbai. I think that gives some flavor.
Also, if past is any indicator, the technology will evolve to make sure that the constraints of space are reduced as far as charging is concerned, as a big bottleneck for charging.
Yeah.
So coming to
one more thing, there's also creative companies. I know companies, startup companies who are looking at, helping you park and charge any part of the city. You just have an app, You say, okay, I want to park and charge, and they'll come and get it and deliver it back to you when you're done with your work. So a lot of interesting models are coming up.
And do you think that this space, anonymous attendee has asked a good question, that do you think the space of EV manufacturing in India may suddenly get congested because the entry barriers are low and a lot of action is...
No, I think it needs a strategy. I think, there will be a lot of small startups, but if you think about larger OEMs, they will come with a strategy. They're not just going to come with one product and then say, okay, I haven't thought of the next product. So it takes a little bit of thinking before you jump in. And if they have a strategy, they will come in. There may be a little bit of oversupply, particularly from startups, etc. But I think it will soon find ways of, finding its equilibrium.
Kaustubhan Srivatsan has also asked a great question. In fact, a comment regarding the geo-commercial implications of acquisition of resources which are required for battery manufacture, etc. We have addressed this in a separate discussion of ours. I would request him to look at that in our webinar. We have done one webinar on this, and which was also a very detailed and eye-opening webinar. Since we are running out of time, I will just respond to what Ashwini Sharma has said. Ashwini Sharma has said that electric vehicles have been around for 25 to 30 years now. So far, the fossil fuel majors, the oil cartel, OPEC, etc., have successfully blunted all efforts by EV manufacturers to popularize EVs. Now, with climate change on center stage, EV may have a better chance. He adds to it, but does the world have the will to mass adopt EVs? I feel will is a matter of time. Will is also a matter of past ways. You say where there is a will, there is a way. But where there are earlier ways, will become stronger. So earlier ways we saw in the case of the automobile, how much it was objected to. We saw it in the case of bulbs, how much they were objected to, how unfeasible they were thought, that who would dream of making power somewhere, transmitting it to your home, sending it to your room, and then lighting a bulb with it. But Thomas Edison, though he was ridiculed and his whole invention was said unviable, he started a company, Edison Electric, which is today's General Electric. And that company established the thermal plant and the transmission lines and the line right up to the home. So those were very discontinuous changes. So what we feel is the time has come, the earlier ways will solidify this will, and I'm sure things are moving forward for the electric vehicle scene. There will be a lot of ups and downs. The change will not be linear, but it is coming. On that note, thank you very much, panelists. Very nice, fine dialogue. And thank you very much, audience. What an enlightened audience, what fine questions you have asked and the comments which you have made. And in such large numbers, when leaders stay in our webinars right up to the end and even after we cross the time limit, it's really encouraging. Thank you very much. And on that note, I pass it back to Gautam Anand.
Thank you very much, sirs. Such an insightful and engaging conversation, and a privilege to hear you all. And very well moderated, Mrs. Choudary. Our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end, and I've taken home several nuggets from today's discussion. I wish we had a little more time. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the very end, for always sharing excellent questions. Thank you, and looking forward to the next session.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.